If you're following along with us in the book, the story, you will notice that this week covers about 17 chapters. We could be here till Tuesday with everything that I need to preach this morning. We won't be here till Tuesday. You will walk out long before then. This story of God's call with Moses is incredibly interesting. There's a lot of things that take place in this, on top of the fact that not just is there this bush that is burning that is not being consumed, but if you notice in the language, God doesn't really even speak to Moses until Moses notices it, and kind of his curiosity gets the better of him, and he kind of walks up to him and is like, whoa, what is this? Why is this bush not being burned up? And then God begins to speak to him. And they go through this whole thing, this whole conversation takes place, and one of the interesting things that I find it compelling in some cases how bold Moses is at times with the way that he talks to God. I mean, here is this burning bush, and as he walks up to it, God speaks, "Take off your sandals, because I'm here, because I have come down, because you're in my presence, take off your sandals. You're on holy ground right now." And he says, "I've got this mission for you. I want you to go free my people." And Moses immediately comes with the excuses. Well, why would they listen to me? What am I supposed to do here? Why would they listen? In fact, what name should I give them to kind of let them know? Because names mean everything, especially in this world, in the world that they're in, this ancient world. And we kind of know this even today. Names carry weight. But one of the interesting things that take place in the ancient world is when you use the name of a king or of a pharaoh, if you use the name of a god, it carried more weight. And what would happen regularly is when somebody wanted something to accomplish their agenda, to get their own desires across, they would say, by the power of or by the name of so-and-so, this is what I want. And whether it's Moses who feels like he needs a little extra to kind of get his point across, or whether it's Moses' nerves wondering, why would Pharaoh even listen to me until I'm able to show him that a God has sent him, we look at this term, Yahweh, the name I am that is given from Moses. And I think over and over and over, one of the things that I have missed in this is what might and possibly and what I believe to be sitting at the heart of this is Moses feels like he needs a little extra weight behind it. What name should I give them to kind of show that this is a legitimate mission? To show that I have some power in this conversation. And God's response is, I am. Or if you look at the literal translation, it probably works out something more like this: I will be who I am, or I am who I will be. I think God is telling him from the get-go, no, this is not a situation where my name will be used for anybody else's agenda. I am. It's all about my agenda. I am going to do this. I am going to be the one to free my people. I am going to be the one that initiates this story, that follows through on everything that I have promised from the get-go. And there are major implications sitting here both for Pharaoh, for Moses, and for God and his people in the midst of this name. I am who I will be. I will be who I am as he brings this forward. For Pharaoh and for Moses, they know Moses is nothing more than God's messenger. It is not his agenda that's being pushed. It is not his agenda that is being worked out here. Moses is serving a much higher purpose. God's had names and God's had gifts and God's had different things that were ascribed to them. They are the God of this. They are the God of this. And here is this God saying, no, I am. I'm the creator of all things. But for Israel, this name comes to bring about so much more. Because here is God saying, I will be the God who fulfills the promises to your ancestors. I have heard your sufferings. I have heard their pain. Interestingly enough, immediately in the conversation, God identifies himself with the oppressed, with his people, and their sufferings become his sufferings. And God's name means, I'm going to fulfill the covenant. I'm giving myself to you in covenant relationship. But as we work through this, I want to take us to the Passover meal this morning. Throughout the plagues, throughout the different interactions that are taking place between Moses and God, between Moses and Pharaoh, one thing is for certain: this is God's story. And Moses, as important a part as he plays, he is messenger for a God who is going to crumble an empire, who is going to humble a king, a Pharaoh, who has been raised to think he is a God. For a country and an empire that has been raised to think their Pharaoh is a God. Here is the God saying, this is my world. These are my people. And at the drop of the hat, I can bring it all to the ground. Earlier in the story, Pharaoh is having boys killed because the Israelites are becoming too great in number. And by the end of this story, here are the firstborn of the Egyptian families and even their flocks and herds that are dying. We will see, and I think there are a few things here that are absolutely vital. And one of the things that you see as we look at the story of Moses is there's this constant understanding all the way through Deuteronomy that what these people experience, they are supposed to pass on to their children. They are supposed to incorporate their children into the story, whether they experienced it firsthand or not. This is a wonderful story. If you've got your Bibles, open up to Exodus chapter 12. Open up to Exodus chapter 12. I'm going to read the first 14 verses here, and then I'm going to skip down to verse 24 and read a few verses there. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall mark for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Tell the whole congregation of Israel that on the 10th of this month they are to take a lamb for each family, a lamb for each household. If a household is too small for a whole lamb, it shall join with its closest neighbor in obtaining one. The lamb shall be divided into proportion to the number of people who eat of it. Your lamb shall be without blemish. A year-old male, you may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You shall keep it until the 14th day of this month. Then the whole assembled congregation of Israel shall slaughter it at twilight. They shall take some of the blood and put it onto the doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they eat it. They shall eat the lamb that same night, and they shall eat it roasted over a fire with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roasted over the fire with its head, legs, and inner organs. You shall let none of it remain until the morning. Anything that remains until the morning you shall burn. This is how you are to eat it. Your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it hurriedly. It is the Passover of the Lord, for I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both human beings and animals. On all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord." Every time you see Lord capitalized, think Yahweh. Think, I will be who I am who I will be. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you live. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague shall destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. Continuing to verse 14 here. This day shall be a day of remembrance for you. You shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord. Throughout your generations you shall observe it as a perpetual ordinance. Skip down to verse 24. You shall observe this rite as a perpetual ordinance for you and your children. When you come to the land that the Lord will give you, as He has promised, you shall keep this observance. And when your children ask you, what do you mean by this observance? You shall say, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, for He passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when He struck down the Egyptians, but spared our houses. And the people bowed down and they worshipped. This story has been told over and over. I remember as a kid going to VBS, and I remember one of the classes were trying to kind of tell this story, and they brought in a real lamb. And I was old enough at the time, I don't remember all this, but I was old enough at the time thinking, they've got a real lamb in here, and they're talking about slaughtering this lamb, and there was this moment like, what are they going to do to this lamb? And the guy who was in there pulls out his knife and walks up to this lamb, and he puts it up to the throat of this lamb. And I thought, no way is this happening in church. No kid will ever come back to God if he slaughters this lamb in front of us. He didn't, but we were a little traumatized. Because that lamb had a name that we found out earlier before this had started. That's why you don't give animals names before you kill them. They need to be named like steak or bacon or something, you know. But you look at this situation and what's taking place here. And as we know, one of the things that happens is after the Passover, Pharaoh lets the people go and they take off. But then as they leave, he chases after them, and God parts the Red Sea. Israel passes through on dry ground, and the Egyptians go in, and the waters cover them up, and they're all drowned. Over and over and over, you see this story as the defining marker for the nation of Israel. Every year, they come back and they tell this story over and over and over again. It becomes so moving and transformative that this story then is fulfilled and changed and given new meaning when Jesus comes, who is the Lamb without blemish that is slaughtered for the sins of the people, and God passes over because they are under His blood. And not just with the story of communion or the Lord's Supper, but also with the story of baptism. As they go into the waters, a slave people, and they come out on the other side, freed for God and for His kingdom. They come out of the waters, a kingdom of priests that we later see used even in Revelation to define the people of God. But there are a few things that I think are important, particularly for this morning. We talk about the blood, we talk about the covering the doors, we talk about the lamb, we talk about the ritual. But I think it's important to put the rituals into perspective, especially for today's church. Because I think one of the things that's happened, and tell me if don't tell me because I'm preaching, you listen. Just kidding. But see if this makes sense. How often do we participate in the Lord's Supper? Or do we participate and see folks who have given their life to God in the beauty of baptism? And it almost gets chalked up to, well, we're just kind of reenacting a story. We're just kind of doing the things that have happened before us. We're just participating in the rituals that were given to us, and so what we are doing is we are obeying how God has told us to do things. But the ritual, the story, the beauty of what God has been doing to free His people for Him, to create them into who He wants them to be, kind of never leaves the ritual. Now, I have no idea had to explain the fullness of how God works. But I got to believe that the rituals and things that we participate in have a whole lot more power and influence and implications for our life rather than just a retelling of the story. Retelling the story is important. But somehow the beauty of God meets us in the retelling of the story, and it shapes us, and it transforms us. Because I think, tell me, again, not literally, but when we look at this, I think there are times that we look at what's taking place in the Passover that later for us becomes the importance of the Lord's Supper, or they go into the waters and we look at the baptism, and we look at this and we chalk up the work to God to salvation and almost only salvation. As though there's not a transformative process that He's looking to create His people into something. It's almost like, if you take the way I have looked at baptism in the past, it would almost be like God taking them through the Red Sea, and then once they cross over onto dry ground, then saying, all right, now hang out here for a little while until I come and get you to take you home. Because after we walk out of the baptistry, it's kind of like, now what do we do? I mean, I'm saved. I'm good to go. Now what happens? And then the goal is almost to just be nice people until we die and God comes to get us. And throughout the story, it is God saying, I'm giving you these symbols, these rituals, these things for you to participate in, but it is more than just reenacting the story to kind of connect with an older thing that took place a long time ago. God meets us in it, and He transforms us, and He moves us, and He shapes us into something. We don't retell the story of Jesus hanging up on a cross and walking up out of the grave simply because it's a nice story. Something in the middle of that, the Holy Spirit of God comes in and starts to shape us into a people that live lives that look like Jesus. We are participants in something. We're not simply telling the story to tell the story. And one of the things that I think is so pivotal is that Moses recognizes this from the get-go. In the future, when your children ask you, why do we do this? It's because of what God has done, and the following generations who did not participate in it as physically present, because of the mysterious power of God, they are incorporated into the story as participants in the story. Following generations knew that the Exodus was their story. It was their story. Because God had formed them through participating in the Passover. And the Lord's Supper is our story, and we are participants in the story anew, even today. It is more than just doing something and then we're done with it and then let's just get to the sermon and then we move on. Christ meets us in it and He shapes us. And I think that's one of the beauties of the thing, the Passover meal that now then becomes the Lord's Supper for us, and it's one of the beauties of the people coming to Jerusalem. They looked forward to that day of the year. They looked forward to that festival. They looked forward to the celebration because they knew they were participating in something that was thousands of years old. And God's Spirit was right in the middle of it, changing them and creating them into the kingdom of priests who would live out and witness to the beauty and the transformation that takes place when people participate in God's story. You have to keep, and we have to keep, the story and the power of the interpretation together. And so you get the call of God who says from the get-go, my name, and we're going to get next week to his fuller name that comes out in Exodus 34. But you get the name that is given, and this is one of the beauties of who God is. God's name becomes his identity for the people at the time that they need him. Because in the moment where God is calling Moses and he says, oh, you tell him I am, what God needs Moses and Israel and Pharaoh to know about who he is and about what his heart is that I'm the creator and I'm the one who's all-powerful and I will accomplish my agenda regardless of the evil empires and the sin in this world. That's what Moses needs to know. That's what Pharaoh comes to know. And that's what the people of God need. Notice, in the story, they are not told what is going to happen. They are given God's name and his identity, and that suffices for their obedience. I guarantee you, there'd have been a little bit of grumbling had they said, by the way, we're going to leave Egypt here in just a little bit. I want you to pack up all of your stuff. We're going to go to the Red Sea. Moses is going to part the waters, and we're going to walk through it. I guarantee you there have been a group going, I have some physics questions for you about how this works. I don't necessarily walk on water. How do we do this? No. His name, his identity, and his love and faithfulness suffice for the journey. And they learn on the journey that yes, he is the creator. And he is faithful and he is good. And as they participate in the story, their children come to experience the God who is faithful and good and leads his people on the journey. But it's more than just rituals. You see what God is looking to do. There is this great saving act that takes place. But I want to reemphasize this and kind of end our time together with this morning. God is in the business of doing a whole lot more than saving people from sin and death. God's identity and his love and faithfulness to us is more than just providing forgiveness, but it is about providing abundant, intimate life with him and with others. Now here's the struggle that I think our American society shapes us with in some cases, and it has been a very big influence upon the church. This is not my story. It is God's story, and it is our story. I think far too often we have privatized Christianity. We have privatized the saving and transforming work of God to where this is mine and me and God have our thing, and this is, as long as I'm good here, we're good to go. And I'll work real hard to kind of keep things good with others, but as long as me and him are good, we're good. Even going back to the beginning of time with Adam and Eve, how one treats God's creation says a whole lot about what they think about their Creator. God has always been a saving and transforming God in plurality for people. You plural. But it's been far more than just saving us from sin and death. It has been about recreating us into a people, into a kingdom of priests, witnessing to the beauty of God's work. And don't think for a moment that we just participated in the Lord's Supper and all it was a ritual of retelling the story of something that took place 2,000 years ago. We were offered the opportunity to be transformed by Christ Himself in His supper this morning. And the beauty of God is that in some mysterious way, He continues to offer us that transformation in the beauty of His supper and in the beauty of the baptistry, of what takes place when we walk up out of the water. We are a people on a journey to witness to our God. And just like Moses, regardless of the excuses, regardless of what we think we're good at and what we don't think we're good at, God will find a way to use us to show the world He is God and He is good. This morning, we offer an invitation as always. If there's anything we can do for you, we want to bless you, we want to journey in life with you. We don't always know how to do that sometimes, but we're trying. Our God is still at work in us and through us. Something we can do for you, you can come as we stand and sing.